All right, another day of me drinking beer and reading Forgotten Soldier, Guy Sajer. We are now on a good chapter. Third part, chapter 10, baby. You ready? And I always want to say this because I see these young hipster millennials say it. If you like my video, like it, comment, and subscribe. I'm just kidding. Don't fucking do that. That's for pussies. All right, here goes. Chapter 10. Gut mit uns. The officers and soldiers waiting to direct us were not particular. Oh, by the way, if you didn't go back and listen to the last one, but they just crossed this big river, the Dnieper, and so they finally got some safety. They've been attacked and attacked and attacked, and they finally got some safety. So they've been going through hell, and it's time to kind of relax a little because this river is going to protect them. Okay, chapter 10. Gut mit uns. The officers and soldiers waiting to direct us were not particularly agreeable. The military police, with their badges glistening damply in the fog, were downright unpleasant. All organizations have police, and some of them must be fine fellows. However, we wanted to forget the police at Romney and on the retreat from the Don to preserve some of the joy we felt at being back in the West. We tramped along, herded by a couple fellows in a sidecar covered with mud. They didn't bother to line us up in threes, to let us walk any way we liked, almost as if we were out for a stroll, which was a pleasant variation of usual practice. Maybe they knew what a hard time we'd had, and had decided to give us a freaking break. I added the word freak in there. Now that we were out of it, maybe everything was going to be all right. The sidecar forced us to increase our pace. We went on for about a mile and a half, stumbling through mud and splattering our companions, to arrive finally at a big camp, where the men who crossed ahead of us were already waiting. It was dark, and a fine rain was falling. We could see the barbed wire gleaming with wetness. Two soldiers with machine guns under their arms waved us through a makeshift entrance. Then we stopped, and the sidecar drove rapidly away. We stood where we'd been left, surrounded by barbed wire, not knowing what to think. We tried to tell ourselves that this was just how things happened in the army, and that this welcome seemed excessively cold because we were fresh from the hell of Konotop. They were probably making us wait so that they could take us straight to clean, comfortable barracks where we would sleep and regain our strength. Or perhaps they were getting our passes ready. This last idea filled us with joy and annihilated the liquid mud and the rain and the barbed wire, which in reality held us prisoner. We waited for about 2 hours. A second group of new arrivals joined us. The rain became heavier, and we were all streaming with water. Quite nearby, we could see a row of huts with firm roofs and weather-tight windows, to which men were being sent in groups of 20. We waited expectantly, certain that they were living through the last of our miseries. The fellows who went into the huts weren't coming out again. They must already be sleeping on soft beds, lucky bastards. An hour later, it was my turn, along with 19 others. There were 2 non-coms and a lieutenant in our group. We went into the building, which had its own generator and was brightly lit. Our state of extreme filth suddenly made us feel awkward. Military men of all ranks and military police were sitting facing us behind a row of long tables. An Obergeistfreiter came up to us, yelling as in the old days at training camp. He told us to get over to the tables to be screened. We should be ready to produce on demand the papers and equipment entrusted to us by the Army. This reception only increased our sense of astonished unease. "First, your documents!" an MP shouted across the table. The lieutenant, who was directly ahead of me in the line, was being interrogated. "Where is your unit, Lieutenant?" "Annihilated, Herr Gendarme. Missing or dead. We had a hard time." The MP said nothing to this. but went on leafing through the lieutenant's papers. Did you leave your men, or were they killed? The lieutenant hesitated for a minute. We were all watching in frozen silence. Is this a court-martial? The lieutenant's voice was exasperated. You must answer my questions, Herr Lieutenant. Where is your unit? The lieutenant clearly felt caught in a trap, as did we all. Very few of us could have answered that question with any precision. He tried to explain. But there's never any point in explaining to an MP. Their powers of comprehension are always limited to the form they wish to fill. Further, it appeared that the lieutenant was missing a great many things. This fact obsessed his interrogator. It didn't matter that the man in front of him was effecting a miracle simply by staying on his feet and had lost at least 30 pounds since entering the army. The MP only noted that Zeiss field glasses, which are part of an officer's equipment, were missing. Also missing were a map case and the section telephone, for which the lieutenant was responsible. In fact, the lieutenant, who had managed to save only his life, was missing far too many things. The army did not distribute its paper and equipment only to have them scattered and lost. A German soldier is expected to die rather than indulge in carelessness with army property. The careless lieutenant was assigned to a penal battalion, and 3 grades were stripped from his rank. At that, he could think himself lucky. The lieutenant's eyes were wide, and he seemed to be fighting for breath. He was a pitiful and terrifying sight. 2 soldiers dragged him off to the right, toward a group of broken men who'd been dealt with in the same way. Then it was my turn. I felt stiff with fright. I pulled my crumpled documents from an inside pocket. The MP rifled through them, throwing me a reproving look. His bad temper seemed to soften somewhat at the sight of my apprehensive, mortified face, and he continues his inventory in silence. Fortunately, I had been able to reintegrate with my unit and had saved the scrap of white cardboard which stated that I had left the infirmary to take part in an attack. My head was swimming, and I thought I was going to faint. Then the MP read off a list of articles which ordinary soldiers like myself were supposed to carry at all times. The words rolled off his tongue, but I didn't catch them quickly enough and didn't immediately produce the items still in my possession. The MP then treated me to a certain German word which I was hearing for the first time. It appeared I was missing 4 items, including that fucking gas mask I had deliberately abandoned. My paybook was passed from hand to hand to be inspected and stamped. In my panic, I made an idiotic move. Hoping to gain favor, I produced 9 unused cartridges from my cartridge belt. The MP's eyes lit on these like the eyes of an alpinist who spots a good foothold. You were retreating? Ja, Herr Unteroffizier. Why didn't you try to defend yourself? Why didn't you fight? He shouted. Ja, Herr Unteroffizier. What do you mean, ja? We were ordered to retreat, Herr Unteroffizier. God damn it to hell, he roared. What kind of army runs without shooting? My paybook came down the line. My interrogator grabbed it and rifled the pages for a moment. His eyes traveled from the filthy, tattered page to my face. I followed the movement of his lips, which might be about to assign me to a penal battalion, to the life of a prisoner, to forward positions, mine clearing, infrequent leaves always confined to camp, so that the word liberty lost all meaning, and the cancellation of mail. I held back my tears with difficulty. Finally, the MP's rigid fingers handed me back my liberty. I had not been assigned to a penal battalion, but my emotion overwhelmed me anyway. As I picked up my pack, I sobbed convulsively, unable to stop. A fellow beside me was doing the same. A crowd of men still waiting stared at me in astonishment. Like a miserable tramp, I ran past the line of tables and left by a door opposite the one we'd entered by. I felt I had disgraced myself. I rejoined my comrades, who were standing in the rain on the other part of the camp. They weren't resting on the soft beds we've dreamed of before coming to this place, and the rain streaming down their shoulders and backs was another hope disappointed. However, despite the slap in the face we had just received from our grateful country, we could still count ourselves lucky. 3 days later, we learned that the day after our crossing, with 6,000 or 7,000 of our men still waiting on the east bank, the Russians had attacked. They were probably discouraged by their failure to take Kiev, where the heavily outnumbered German army was fighting desperately, and decided to clean up the pockets still occupied by the Wehrmacht. 24 hours after our group left, our comrades on the east bank were suddenly dazzled by the flares that flooded their temporary encampments with brilliant light. The lookouts on the shallow trenches scratched in the hills overlooking the river, who were supposed to provide an illusion of protection, watched the shouting hordes of Russian infantry flood down to the river. These soldiers quickly realized they would never be able to stop that irresistible tide, and succumbed to a moment of absolute panic. Some ran through the deafening explosions of Soviet rockets, which drowned out our Spandals and light mortars. The Russians, driven by expectations of victory and the exhortation of the people's commissars, pushed forward regardless of the cost. The cost was enormous. Each German projectile seemed to hit home. Ivan continued his inexorable advance. On the mud landing stage from which I had embarked, panic gave way to madness. One of the rafts, which was loaded up as usual, was swamped by a human flood. The few who managed to keep cool heads shouted for calm and sometimes even used their guns. In the grotesque, trampling rush, mooring ropes gave way and the raft drifted out a few yards, shuddering under the weight of the mob which overran it. Hands trying to grip the edge of the ramp were trampled and crushed by heavy boots. On the landing stage, friends were fighting each other. Some of the officers committed suicide. The raft moved out another couple yards and then suddenly tipped away from the bank like a child's toy. A loud cry mingled with the sound of the approaching battle, and 200 terrified men floundered in the water, clinging together or trying to swim. A great many sank and drowned instantly. At that moment, Ivan appeared at the crest of the hills, having swept the defenders aside. Drunk with excitement, the Russian soldiers dropped to the ground on one knee and picked off Germans as if they were clay pigeons at a fair. A few Germans, white as ghosts, fired back with their FM, but their numbers were so small the Russians scarcely noticed them. Several thousand others were running, screaming, trying to get away, and dying as they ran. The Russians also fired at the men in the water who were trying to swim, using flares to light the darkness. An hour after they appeared on the skyline, the Russians reached the river. There were a few more scattered shots, but their victory was complete. A third of the remaining German troops were taken prisoner, and for the rest, everything was over. Their military responsibilities had come to an end, and they would never again be victimized by military police. At the reception camp, we stood in the rain a little longer, and then 3 blacked-out trucks appeared to collect us. Despite the appalling road and overload which threatened to burst the slatted sides, 50 soldiers wrapped in sacking were piled onto each truck with all their equipment. I was stuffed in one of these human ant heaps. That is to say, one leg was buried in the swarm, while the other one dangled out. I was astride the back flap, but there were other fellows hanging on for dear life who were almost entirely outside the truck. We rolled off through the quiet night. I felt completely disorientated and hadn't the faintest sense of direction. An hour later, excuse me, I gotta take another drink. I'm drinking some good margaritas tonight. An hour later, we drew up to a group of buildings, which first, excuse me, coughing, which first appeared as a vague, blurring mass in the dim bluish light. We realized that an unusual rush of activity was taking place all around us, and then gradually perceived that we were looking at a row of structures bordered on both sides by tree-lined roads jammed with innumerable vehicles. There were troops everywhere, on foot or arriving or leaving in high-speed motorcycles, many officers and MPs. The trucks jerked to a sudden halt, and we were told to get off. Although we still understood that we'd been saved, we were beginning to feel that we'd had enough. We were famished and dropping with sleep. We had to wait for another half hour before someone came to take charge of us. The rain fell steadily. Was it raining anywhere else? Was it raining in France? I started to think of my house and my bed. Where were they now? In which direction? But I could only summon up confused and fragmented memories of the life I had left behind. My only world was the vast anonymity of Russia, which seemed to be engulfing all of us, absorbing entire regiments so that even their names vanished. Finally, a non-com came over to us. Our group leader handed him our papers, which he examined with a dimmed flashlight. Then he ordered us to collect our gear and follow him. At last, we entered the shelter of a roof, an amenity to which we'd grown so unaccustomed, we stared at it as if it were the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. "You'll be sent to your units later," shouted the non-com, who, like the rest of us, seemed to have had just about enough. "While you're waiting, try to get a little rest." He did not have to repeat himself. We explored the darkness of the hut with our pocket flashlights and discovered it contained a couple of benches, 4 or 5 large tables. Everyone stretched out where he could, making pillows of the nearest log or buttocks or boot. The discomfort seemed unimportant beside the fact that at last we were out of the rain. Some fellows began to snort immediately. Others tried to pretend they were somewhere else. Despite our harsh reception, we all had a sense that from now on everything would go better, and that once again life was offering its possibilities. We all thought of the leave that we surely would be getting, which was now only a question of patience. However, soldiers fresh from the front cannot indulge the luxury of daydreams. The accumulated lack of sleep gripped our temples like an iron band. Like people suffering a serious illness, we dropped swiftly from consciousness into deep sleep. We probably slept for a long time. It was broad daylight when a burst of noise suddenly woke us. Then a long blast of a whistle ordered us to our feet. We were all filthy and horribly crumpled. If the Fuhrer had seen us, he would have either sent us all home or had us shot. The non-com who had waked us looked at us with an expression of surprise. Perhaps he too had never imagined that the German army could be reduced to such a state. He spoke to us, but I no longer remember what he said. I was still only half awake and understood that he was talking without really listening to him. We gathered that we were to prepare for departure. We were going to be returned to our units. One of the huts had been fitted with showers, but so many men were waiting that we clearly had no chance of getting inside. Instead, we were given some empty gasoline vats full of hot water. However, we all felt too exhausted to want to wash. Our days of training, when we were appalled by the smallest spot on our tunics, seemed very far away. Our concern had shifted from hygiene to something far more urgent. Furthermore, it was bitterly cold, and no one wanted to take anything off, not even the sacking draped over your shoulders. It was so cold I was shivering, and and I wondered if I was getting sick again. We had to go outside for food and lined up like a column of tramps beside the field kitchen. A cold east wind was blowing damp patches of fog in from the river. Two cooks emptied large ladles of hot soup into our chipped and filthy mess tins. We had been expecting the usual ersatz, but it seemed that the time for that had long gone by. As a special gesture, they were serving us 11 o'clock soup early. The burning hot mixture made us feel much better. A Hauptmann stared at us as he walked by, and then turned back, obviously looking for our unit leader. The lieutenant who filled his position got up and walked over to him. "Kamerad," the captain said, you and your men have been given the opportunity to clean up. I think you should make the most of it." "Jawohl, Herr Hauptmann." The lieutenant ordered us over to the vats, which were standing under the eaves of one of the huts. We looked enviously at the fellows who were going to get into the hot showers. At least 300 men were waiting for an experience which seemed like a blessing from heaven so close to the front. Those at the front of the line had more or less undressed and were scratching the lice which had settled in a ring at the belt line, and we were suddenly ordered to prepare for immediate departure. For me, at least, this was a reprieve. Stripping in that icy air had begun to seem impossibly difficult. I much preferred to keep my lice relatively warm between my gray undervest and my stomach, which was rumbling with hunger. I was certainly ill again. I no longer had any doubts. I couldn't stop shivering and felt cold right to the soles of my feet. We piled into the open trucks, overloading them as usual, but no one complained. No matter how squashed we were, it was better than walking. However, I was caught in a grotesque predicament. The trucks rolled off down a road which the rains had transformed into a swamp. The trucks behind us gave off 2 sprays of liquid mud, as steady and uniform as the sprays of a municipal fountain. I was strangely reminded of the retreat from the Don. Was Russia nothing but a vast sea of mud? As always, we were driving toward a northern horizon marked by dark forests. The echoes of occasional explosions drifted to us in the wind, but they didn't sound serious. The sky was overcast and threatened to rain. Huddled between 2 companions, I swayed to the slow rhythm of the truck struggling through the mire. I felt more and more uncomfortable and ill. My lips and face seemed to be burning, and the slightest motion of the air felt like ice against my skin. My stomach was gripped by a brutal pain which traveled outward through my body in waves of violent shivers. At first I thought this might be an after effect of the hard times we've been through, especially as I had never entirely recovered from my illness at Kolokot. I knew that I must look more cadaverous than ever. My intestines were twisting themselves in knots. Naturally, nobody gave a damn, and besides, I was certainly not the only one with pain in my gut. Then my pain became so imperative that I tried to double over, despite the crowding and all my gear. The fellow beside me noticed my restlessness and leaned his hairy face toward me. "Hey, take it easy, Fred. We'll soon be there." But he clearly had no more idea where we were going than I did. I've got a hell of a pain in the gut. And this is a hell of a time to crap. Suddenly I realized what was the matter with me. My stomach was churning with intense violence and threatened to explode. I certainly couldn't stop a military conflict because my guts were about to turn inside out. I had to laugh at my predicament, to fight my shivers and cramps and salivate mess, but I also had to try to think of a solution. The convoy was now in the middle of a forest where there was no reason to stop, and even if they came to a camp, I couldn't just leave my group the moment we arrived, then I'd appear in Movid. If I did that, they might even shoot me as a deserter. But could I hold out much longer? I tried desperately to think of something else, but failed. My pains increased, and I broke out in gloos as finally my gut simply opened up. "Move over, little fellow," I said, grimacing. I got terrible diarrhea, and I can't wait anymore. "What's the hurry? You'll be able to crap when we get there." "But I'm sick, damn it." He muttered something and moved one of his feet, although there was nowhere to put it. No one laughed. In fact, everybody seemed entirely different to my plight. I struggled desperately with my clothes, but in the cramped space and comfortable with my equipment, I was unable to free the lower half of my body. Finally, I realized there was nothing I could do. Our journey continued for a considerable time, during which I suffered 2 further attacks of uncontrollable diarrhea, although my state of filth was scarcely aggravated by these eruptions. I would gladly have exchanged 10 years of my life for a chance to clean off and fall asleep in a warm bed. I was shaken by fits and shivers and burning heat, and the pain in my intestines grew and more intense. After what seemed like an eternity, we arrived at our new camp, and I was dragging from the truck for roll call. My head was swimming. I struggled to remain conscious. However, my ghastly appearance did not escape the attention of the inspective officer, and my gasping replies to his questions interrupted the regular rhythm of roll call. "What's the matter with you?" "I'm sick. I was barely able to stammer a reply and saw him only as a blurring and shifting silhouette. "What's bothering you?" "My stomach. I have a fever. Could I please go and wash air?" "Take him to the medical service as an urgent case," continued the officer, speaking to a subordinate.